Once the brew kettle has been filled to the appropriate level, we'll go ahead and cut off the sparge in the mash tun, stop running the extract over, and bring the contents of the kettle to a boil. Once it starts boiling, a couple things happen in rapid succession. We take a quick sample so we can measure the level of sugars in the initial transferred amount, and also so we can typically add our first hop. Now, not every beer gets hops right at the beginning of boil. If it's a beer with low bitterness, we may add it later in the boil, but for most beers, we'll add our first hops right at the very beginning of the boil, and these are what we call our bittering hops. The primary flavors that will be extracted from these hops will be to bitter the beer and balance with the malt flavors that we're developing in the kettle. Throughout the boil, we will add hops on a periodic basis, usually about an hour into the boil, and then again near the end of the boil, which is usually about an hour and a half. And each time we add hops, there's going to be a different sort of blend of bitterness and hop flavor that comes from that addition. So that middle addition, kind of at 60 minutes, we get some flavor, we get a little bit of bitterness probably, and we get mostly flavor and a little bit of aroma. The very last addition into the brew kettle will give us primarily aroma and a small amount of flavor. So it's really important to remember that the impact of the hops differs depending on when they are added to the boil kettle. Once we've come to the end of the boil, we will start to whirlpool the beer, or now the wort still, in the kettle. And whirlpooling is simply spinning it in a circle. We put it through the pump and introduce it in this little sidearm that gets it to spin. In a few of our locations we use a paddle because we're small enough to do that. And what the whirlpool does is it creates essentially a centrifuge inside the brew kettle. And while it's spinning and slowing down, all the solids from the hop matter, there's proteins that we've coagulated and drawn out of the malt during the boil, that all draws together and falls down to the bottom of the kettle. So we have a fairly clear liquid wort that we're going to be transferring out to ferment, because all that extra stuff just gums up the works. Our yeast doesn't like it. It makes the equipment dirtier, so we try to keep that behind in the boil kettle. We also, right during the whirlpool, we will take a sample again of the wort so we can, again, measure those sugars, understand how much we've concentrated those sugars in the wort over the course of the boil, because that's a big piece of what we're doing here, developing hop flavors, concentrating the sugars, and we're also sterilizing the wort, making sure we're sending good, clean liquid over to our yeast to ferment. Now we'll go ahead and talk about transferring the wort over to the fermenter.